A millionaire panics without a translator until a housekeeper's daughter steps in. Before we dive in, this video is traveling across time zones right now. Share what season you're experiencing where you live. Richard Wellington gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Standing in the marble lobby of the Grand Hotel Esperanza in Mexico City, the 65-year-old millionaire felt smaller than he had in decades. "What do you mean you can't come?" His voice cracked as he spoke to his longtime translator, James. Mitchell threw the phone. "The Mendoza deal. James, this is everything. 40 years of building my empire comes down to tomorrow's meeting." The response on the other end made Richard's heart sink deeper. James's mother had suffered a stroke. Family came first. Richard understood that, even respected it. But understanding didn't solve his catastrophic problem. Richard had built Wellington Industries from nothing, turning a small construction company into a multinational corporation worth $800 million. He spoke boardroom English fluently, could negotiate with titans of industry, but put him in front of Spanish-speaking investors, and he was helpless as a child. The Mendoza Group represented his final shot at securing his legacy. At 65, with his health declining and his estranged children showing no interest in the business, this merger would ensure his life's work survived. Without it, everything would crumble after his death. He looked around the hotel lobby, panic rising in his chest. Elegant Mexican families chatted in rapid Spanish, their words flowing like music he couldn't comprehend. Tomorrow morning, he needed to convince the Mendoza family to merge their hospitality empire with his construction business. The potential was enormous, luxury resorts across Latin America, but it required perfect communication. Richard had spent months learning about Mexican business culture, studying the Mendoza family history, preparing every detail except the most crucial one. What would happen if he couldn't speak their language? His phone buzzed with a text from his cardiologist back in Chicago. "Remember, Richard, stress is your enemy. Take your medication and try to stay calm." Stay calm? Richard almost laughed at the irony. Here he was, a man who had faced down corporate raiders and survived the 2008 financial crisis, brought to his knees by a language barrier. He approached the concierge desk, where a young man in an impeccable uniform smiled professionally. "Excuse me," Richard began slowly. I need someone who speaks perfect English and Spanish. It's urgent. Tomorrow I have the most important business meeting of my life." The concierge nodded sympathetically. "Si, Senor Wellington, I understand your situation. However, most professional translators are booked months in advance, especially the certified ones suitable for high-level business negotiations." "Money is no object," Richard said desperately. "Name any price." "Let me make some calls, senor, but I must be honest. Finding someone qualified on such short notice." The concierge's expression said everything. Richard walked to the bar, ordering a whiskey he shouldn't drink with his heart medication. The amber liquid burned, but not as much as the fear gnawing at his chest. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, including his relationship with his own children, hung in the balance. As he sat there, watching the ice melt in his glass, Richard wondered if this was how his story would end, not with a bang, but with a whimper, defeated by words he couldn't understand. Maria Garcia pushed her cleaning cart down the opulent hallway of the 5th floor, humming softly to herself. At 52, she had worked at the Grand Hotel Esperanza for 15 years, witnessing countless dramas unfold among the wealthy guests. But tonight felt different somehow. She paused outside room 512, hearing muffled voices through the thick door. It wasn't unusual. Wealthy businessmen often worked late, but something in the tone made her linger. Years of cleaning rooms had taught her to read the emotional residue people left behind, and this felt heavy with desperation. Maria continued with her work, but couldn't shake the feeling that someone nearby needed help in a way that money couldn't. Bye. An hour later, she was finishing the presidential suite when her phone rang. Isabella's cheerful voice filled the room through the speaker. "Mummy, how was your day? You sound tired. Just a long shift, mija. How are your studies going?" Maria settled into a chair, grateful for the sound of her daughter's voice. Isabella was her pride and joy. 28 years old, brilliant and working toward her MBA while teaching English to support herself. "Actually, something interesting happened today," Isabella said. "One of my English students told me about a businessman who's desperate for a translator. Apparently, he's offering a fortune for someone to help him with a meeting tomorrow." "That's nice, honey, but you should focus on your studies, not on some stranger's problems." "Mummy, you don't understand. The student said this man is at your hotel, a Mr. Wellington in room 512. He's apparently having some kind of crisis." Maria nearly dropped the phone. Room 512, the same room where she had sensed such desperation earlier. "Isabella, listen to me very carefully. These wealthy men can be demanding and difficult. You have your own life, your own dreams. Don't get involved in situations that could complicate things." But even as she said the words, Maria remembered the pain she had heard in that voice through the door. She had spent 15 years invisible to guests like Mr. Wellington, but she recognized genuine suffering when she heard it. "I'm not looking for complications, Mummy, but if someone needs help and I can provide it, shouldn't I at least consider it? Besides, the money could help pay for my final semester." After hanging up, Maria finished her cleaning with Wellington's. A room on her mind. She had learned long ago that the very wealthy were often the most isolated people in the world. Money built walls as effectively as it opened doors. As she passed room 512 for the final time that night, she heard something that stopped her cold, the sound of a grown man crying. In all her years at the hotel, through all the dramas and crises she had witnessed, she had never heard something so heartbreaking. It was the sound of someone who had everything yet felt completely alone. Maria stood in the hallway for a long moment, thinking about Isabella's words. Her daughter had inherited her father's intelligence and her own compassionate heart. Maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity for Isabella to use both. She pulled out her phone and typed a careful message. "Isabella, if you're serious about helping this man, call me tomorrow morning. But promise me you'll be careful. Some opportunities come with hidden costs." What Maria didn't tell her daughter was what she had observed during her years of invisible service. Sometimes the people who needed help the most were the ones who had forgotten how to ask for it. The next morning brought no relief to Richard's anxiety. He had slept perhaps 2 hours, spending the rest of the night pacing his suite and rehearsing English phrases that would sound ridiculous in a Spanish boardroom. At 7 a.m., his phone rang with devastating news. The concierge had contacted every professional translation service in Mexico City. Either they were booked, or they demanded 2 weeks' notice, or they were simply too expensive even for Richard's considerable resources. "There is one possibility, Senor Wellington," the concierge said carefully. "A young woman called this morning. She's not a professional translator, but she's perfectly bilingual and has some business background. She asked me to tell you she would like to help." Richard's heart leaped. "Send her up immediately." "Sir, I should mention, she's not what you might expect. She's the daughter of one of our cleaning staff." The old Richard would have dismissed the suggestion immediately, but desperation had a way of reshaping prejudices. "I don't care if she's the daughter of the president or a janitor. If she can help me communicate, send her up." 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on his door. Richard opened it to find a young woman with intelligent dark eyes and a nervous but determined expression. She wore simple but neat clothes and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Isabella Garcia. I understand you need translation help for a business meeting." Richard stared at her for a moment. She looked so young, so ordinary. This was the person his entire future depended on? Please come in. I have to be honest, Miss Garcia. This isn't just any business meeting. This is the most important negotiation of my life. Are you certain you can handle high-level business discussions? Isabella stepped into the opulent suite, and Richard noticed she didn't seem intimidated by the luxury. Mr. Wellington, I've been teaching business English for 3 years while completing my MBA. I understand corporate terminology in both languages, but more importantly, I understand that effective translation isn't just about words. It's about communicating intent, respect, and trust. Something in her tone made Richard look at her more carefully. There was intelligence there, and something else, a maturity that seemed older than her years. The meeting is in 4 hours, Richard said. The Mendoza family owns the largest hospitality group in Latin America. I'm trying to convince them to merge with my construction company to build luxury resorts. Everything I've worked for depends on this going perfectly. Isabella nodded thoughtfully. Tell me about your business philosophy. Mr. Wellington, what drives you? What would you want the Mendoza family to understand about who you are, not just what you own? The question surprised Richard. Most translators focused on vocabulary and grammar. This young woman was asking about his soul. I built my company from nothing. My father was a day laborer who died when I was 16. I swore I would never be powerless again. Every building I've constructed has been a promise to him that his son wouldn't just survive, he would thrive. Isabella listened intently. And now? What does this deal mean to you now? Richard was quiet for a long moment. I'm dying, Miss Garcia. My heart is failing, and my children want nothing to do with the business. This merger isn't about making more money. It's about ensuring that what I built survives me. It's about creating something beautiful that will last long after I'm gone. Isabella studied his face carefully. Mr. Wellington, I'll help you, but I need you to understand something. Successful negotiations in Mexican business culture are built on personal relationships, not just profit margins. The Mendoza family will want to know that you respect their values, their history, their way of doing business. I'm prepared to learn, Richard said quietly. Good, Isabella replied, because we have 4 hours to prepare, and I'm going to teach you how to speak not just with words, but with your heart. For the first time in days, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. Isabella spent the next 3 hours transforming Richard's entire approach to the meeting. She explained that Don Carlos Mendoza, the family patriarch, valued personal honor above profit, that his daughter Elena ran the day-to-day operations with fierce intelligence, and that his son Miguel was passionate about sustainable tourism. You can't just pitch them numbers, Isabella explained, as they sat in Richard's suite, papers spread across the coffee table. You need to show them how your vision aligns with their values. The Mendoza family has been building hotels for 3 generations. They're not interested in quick profits or flashy developments. Richard listened intently as Isabella helped him understand the cultural nuances that could make or break the negotiation. She taught him key phrases in Spanish, not just for politeness, but to show respect for their language and culture. Why are you helping me? Richard asked suddenly. I mean, really helping. You could have just taken my money and provided basic translation services. Isabella was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the bustling Mexico City streets. Below. My mother has worked in this hotel for 15 years. She's invisible to most guests, just another worker who cleans their rooms and changes their sheets. But she's the strongest, most dignified person I know. She turned back to Richard. I've watched how some wealthy people treat workers like her, with indifference, sometimes with cruelty, but I've also seen the rare ones who recognize the humanity in everyone they meet. I'm helping you because I believe you could be one of the Rare ones. Richard felt something shift inside his chest, not his failing heart, but something deeper. Your mother, what's her name? Maria Garcia. She works the evening shift, floors 4 through 6. I'd like to meet her properly someday, to thank her for raising such an extraordinary daughter. Isabella smiled, and Richard caught a glimpse of the warmth that had driven her to help a stranger in crisis. She would like that, Mr. Wellington. She believes that kindness is the only currency that really matters. At 11:30 a.m., they took a taxi to the Mendoza family's corporate offices in Polanco. Richard's hands were shaking, from nerves, from his heart condition, or from the magnitude of what lay ahead. He wasn't sure. Remember, Isabella said softly as they rode the elevator to the top floor, they're not just evaluating your business proposal. They're evaluating you as a person. Show them the man who built something from nothing to honor his father's memory. The elevator doors opened to reveal an elegant reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A receptionist led them to a conference room where 3 people waited, a distinguished older man with silver hair and kind eyes, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, and a younger man with an easy smile. "Senor Wellington," the older man said in accented English, rising to greet them. "I'm Carlos Mendoza. This is my daughter Elena and my son Miguel." Richard felt his throat tighten. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. He looked at Isabella, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Don Carlos," Richard began, and Isabella smoothly translated his words into elegant Spanish. "It is an honor to meet you and your family. I come to you not just as a businessman, but as someone who deeply respects what you have built here." As Isabella translated, Richard watched the Mendoza family's faces carefully. He saw skepticism in Elena's eyes, curiosity in Miguel's expression, and something warmer in Don Carlos's weathered features. The conversation that followed was unlike any business meeting Richard had ever experienced. Instead of immediately diving into profit projections and market analysis, they talked about family, about legacy, about the responsibility that came with success. Richard found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, telling them about his father, about his regrets with his own children, about his desire to create something meaningful before his time ran out. 2 hours into the meeting, something remarkable was happening. The Mendoza family wasn't just listening to Richard's business proposal, they were connecting with his story. Isabella's translation was flawless, but more than that, she was helping Richard navigate the emotional undertones of the conversation. When Eleanor asked pointed questions about Richard's company's environmental policies, Isabella helped him explain his growing commitment to sustainable construction. When Miguel expressed concerns about maintaining local employment, Richard was able to share his own experiences growing up in a working-class community. But it was Don Carlos who asked the question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Senor Wellington," the patriarch said in careful English, "you speak of legacy, of creating something that will last. But why should we trust that your vision aligns with ours? In business, it is easy to say the right words. How do we know what is in your heart?" Richard felt the weight of the moment. Everything hung on his answer. He looked at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. "Don Carlos," Richard began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I can't prove my intentions with words alone, but I can tell you this. I've spent 40 years building a company, and only in the last few months have I learned the difference between being successful and being significant." Isabella translated, her voice carrying the emotion behind Richard's words. "My translator today isn't a professional businesswoman," Richard continued, looking directly at each member of the Mendoza family. "She's a young woman working toward her MBA, teaching English to pay for school, and helping her mother who cleans hotel rooms. She could have taken my money and provided basic translation services. Instead, she spent hours teaching me about your culture, your values, your way of doing business. The room was completely silent as Isabella translated, her own eyes widening slightly at where Richard was heading with this. That generosity of spirit, that commitment to doing something meaningful rather than just profitable, that's what I want to bring to our partnership. I want to build resorts that don't just house tourists, but that create opportunities for people, like Isabella and her mother. Places where local communities thrive, where workers are treated with dignity, where success is measured not just in revenue, but in lives improved. Don Carlos exchanged looks with his children before responding in Spanish. Isabella listened carefully, then translated. He says that in business, as in life, the most important negotiations happen not between companies, but between hearts. He would like to continue our discussions over dinner tonight, with your translator. As our guest, Richard felt a wave of relief and gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. Please tell Don Carlos that I would be honored and that Isabella's presence would make the evening perfect. As they shook hands and prepared to leave, Elena approached Isabella directly. Your translation today was exceptional, she said in English. But more than that, you helped two parties understand each other's true intentions. That's a rare gift. Isabella blushed slightly. Thank you, Senora Mendoza. I believe that business at its best is about building bridges between people, not just profit margins. Indeed, Elena replied thoughtfully. Miguel and I have been discussing expanding our corporate education programs. Someone with your skills and perspective might be exactly what we need. Perhaps we should talk more tonight. As they left the building, Richard felt lighter than he had in months. The deal wasn't closed yet, but something more important had happened. A connection had been forged, a relationship built on mutual respect and shared values. Isabella, he said as they waited for their taxi, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with this deal, you've already given me something invaluable. You've reminded me what it feels like to be genuinely proud of who I am, not just what I own. Isabella smiled, but Richard noticed something thoughtful in her expression, as if she were wrestling with something she couldn't quite put into words. Mr. Wellington, she said carefully, there's something I should tell you before tonight's dinner. Something about my family that might complicate things. But before she could continue, their taxi arrived and Richard's phone rang with an urgent call from his cardiologist back in Chicago. As they drove through the busy Mexico City streets, Richard had no idea that Isabella was harboring a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about this remarkable day. The phone call from Dr. Sarah Chen hit Richard like a physical blow. His latest test results were worse than expected. The heart medication wasn't working as well as they had hoped, and his condition was deteriorating faster than anticipated. Richard, I need you to seriously consider the surgery we discussed. Dr. Chen's voice was grave through the phone speaker. Without intervention, we're looking at months, not years. Isabella watched Richard's face pale as he absorbed the news. They were sitting in the hotel bar, an hour before the dinner with the Mendoza family, and she could see him struggling to process what he'd just heard. How long would recovery take? Richard asked quietly. 6 months minimum, possibly longer, and that's assuming everything goes perfectly. After Richard hung up, he sat in silence for several minutes, staring at his untouched drink. Isabella waited patiently, recognizing that he needed space to process this devastating news. 6 months, he finally said. The Mendoza deal has to close within the next 60 days, or they'll move forward with their European partners. If I have surgery now, I lose everything. But if you don't have surgery, Isabella began gently, I die. Yes, I understand the math. Richard's voice was bitter. 40 years of building an empire, and it comes down to this: save my life or save my legacy, but I can't have both. Isabella studied his face carefully. Mr. Wellington, can I ask you something personal? Richard nodded, too emotionally drained to maintain his usual business formality. This legacy you're fighting to preserve, who is it really for? You mentioned your children aren't interested in the business, so who benefits if you sacrifice your health to close this deal? The question hit Richard harder than his cardiologist's phone call. He had been so focused on preserving his life's work that he had never seriously considered why it mattered if there was no one left to care about it. I suppose I thought that if I could create something magnificent enough, important enough, maybe my children would change their minds. Maybe they would finally understand what I was trying to build. And if they don't? If you create the most successful resort empire in Latin America, but you're not alive to see it, and your children still want nothing to do with it, what then? Richard was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Then I suppose I would have spent my final months building monuments to my own ego instead of trying to repair the relationships that actually matter. Isabella reached across the table and gently touched his hand. Mr. Wellington, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned earlier, but I was afraid it would complicate things. Richard looked up, seeing something serious in her expression that hadn't been there before. My mother, Maria Garcia, she wasn't always a hotel cleaning lady. 15 years ago, she worked as an office manager for a construction company in Chicago, Wellington Industries. Richard's blood ran cold. What? She was let go during the 2009 layoffs. 500 employees terminated in a single day to cut costs after the financial crisis. She was a single mother, no severance package, no assistance finding new work. We lost our apartment, had to move in with relatives. Eventually we came to Mexico to stay with my aunt. Richard felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Isabella, I remember those layoffs. It was the worst day of my professional life, but I had no choice. It was terminate workers or lose the entire company. I know, Isabella said softly. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. My mother has never spoken badly of you, even after everything we went through. She always said that sometimes good people have to make terrible choices. Then why are you helping me after what I did to your family? Isabella was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because 15 years ago, you made a business decision that destroyed our life in Chicago. But today, I had the chance to make a personal choice that could save yours. I wanted to see which felt more powerful, revenge or forgiveness. Richard stared at her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was telling him. And what's the answer? Isabella smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. Forgiveness, Mr. Wellington. Definitely forgiveness. Because helping you today helped me understand something important. The man who fired my mother wasn't evil. He was just afraid. And the man sitting across from me now isn't the same person who made that decision 15 years ago. Richard felt tears rolling down his cheeks, no longer caring who might see them. Isabella, I don't know how to apologize for what I did to your family. You don't need to apologize, Mr. Wellington, but you do need to make a choice. You can spend your remaining time trying to build a business empire that no one you love will inherit, or you can spend it building relationships with people who actually matter, including, perhaps, your own children. As they sat in the elegant hotel bar, Richard realized that Isabella had given him far more than translation services. She had given him clarity about what truly mattered in the time he had left. The dinner with the Mendoza family was still ahead, and the business deal still hung in the balance. But for the first time in months, Richard wasn't thinking about his legacy. He was thinking about his life and how he wanted to spend whatever time remained. The revelation about Isabella's mother changed everything, but not in the way he would have expected. Instead of guilt or shame, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of redemption and the courage to choose differently. The dinner at Casa Mendoza was unlike any business meal Richard had ever experienced. The family's private dining room was warm and intimate, filled with photographs spanning 3 generations of hotel ownership. Isabella sat beside Richard, no longer just his translator, but his bridge to understanding a completely different way of conducting business. Don Carlos raised his wine glass as the evening began. "To new friendships," he said in Spanish, which Isabella translated, "and to the courage it takes to be honest about our intentions." As courses arrived, traditional Mexican dishes prepared by the family's longtime chef, the conversation flowed between business and personal topics. Richard found himself sharing stories about his late father, about the loneliness of success, about his regrets with his own children. "You know, Senor Wellington," Elena said halfway through dinner, "when we first heard about your interest in our company, we were skeptical. American businessmen often see Latin American markets as opportunities for quick expansion without understanding our values." Isabella translated, then added softly to Richard, "This is your chance to show them you're different." Richard set down his fork and looked directly at Elena. "Senora Mendoza, I'll be honest with you. 6 months ago, you would have been absolutely right to be skeptical. I was exactly the kind of businessman you're describing, focused on profit, margins and market penetration, not on understanding the communities where I was building." He paused while Isabella translated, then continued, "But recent events have changed my perspective dramatically. I've learned that the most valuable currency isn't money, it's trust. And trust can only be built through genuine relationships and shared values." Miguel leaned forward, interested. "What kind of recent events?" Richard glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm dying," he said simply. "My heart is failing, and I have perhaps months to live. That diagnosis has a way of clarifying what really matters." The table fell silent as Isabella translated. Don Carlos studied Richard's face carefully, then spoke in rapid Spanish to his children. Isabella listened, then turned to Richard. "He says that facing mortality with dignity is the mark of a truly honorable man. He wants to know what you hope to accomplish in the time you have left." Richard felt the weight of the question. 3 days ago, his answer would have been immediate. Close the biggest deal of his career and secure his legacy. But sitting in this warm dining room, looking at the genuine concern in these people's faces, his priorities had shifted. "I want to build something beautiful," he said finally. "Not just profitable, but meaningful. Something that creates opportunities for people like Isabella and her mother. Something that honors the communities where we work." As the evening progressed, Richard found himself making a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. "Don Carlos, I need to share something with you. I've recently learned that I need heart surgery soon. The recovery will take months, which means I can't personally oversee the initial phases of our partnership." Isabella translated, watching the Mendoza family's reactions carefully. "However," Richard continued, "I'd like to propose something unconventional. Isabella here has shown remarkable insight into both business and cultural bridge building. I'd like to recommend her as my initial representative, working closely with your team to develop the partnership framework while I recover." Elena's eyebrows rose. "You would trust someone you met yesterday to represent your interests in a multi-million-dollar deal?" "I would trust someone who chose forgiveness over revenge, who helped a stranger in crisis despite having every reason to walk away, and who understands that business should serve humanity, not the other way around." Don Carlos was quiet for a long time, then smiled broadly. "Senor Wellington, I believe this dinner has been the beginning of a beautiful partnership. But more than that, I think it has been the beginning of a friendship." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor approached Isabella privately. "We spoke briefly this afternoon about our corporate education programs. After watching you tonight, I'm even more convinced we need someone with your skills. Would you consider joining our team officially?" Isabella's eyes widened. I would be honored to discuss it." "Good. Because I suspect this partnership between our companies is going to need someone who understands both sides equally well." Walking back to the hotel under the Mexico City stars, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. Not the peace of accomplishment, but the peace of making choices aligned with his deepest values. "Isabella," he said as they reached the hotel entrance, "tomorrow I'm flying back to Chicago to schedule my surgery. But before I do, I need to ask you something. Will you help me with one more translation project?" "Of course, Mr. Wellington. I need to call my children, and I need help finding the words to apologize for 40 years of putting business before family." The next morning, Richard sat in his hotel suite with Isabella, staring at his phone. His daughter Amanda's number was displayed on the screen, but his finger hovered over the call button. "I haven't spoken to Amanda in 8 months, he admitted to Isabella. "Our last conversation was about her mother's memorial service. She said I cared more about a conference call than honoring my wife's memory." "Was she right?" Isabella asked. Gently, Richard closed his eyes, remembering that painful day. "Yes, I took a business call during the service. I told myself it was urgent, but the truth is, I didn't know how to grieve. I only knew how to work. Mr. Wellington, what would you want to hear if you were Amanda?" "The truth," Richard said quietly, "that I was wrong, that I was afraid, that I love her more than any business deal, but I never learned how to show it." He pressed the call button before he could lose his nerve. "Dad?" Amanda's voice was surprised, cautious. "Amanda, sweetheart, I know this call is unexpected. I'm in Mexico City and I've learned some things about myself that I need to share with you." There was a long pause. "Mexico City. Dad, are you okay? You sound different." "I'm not okay, actually. My heart condition is worse than I told you. Need surgery soon, and I might not have very much time left." Isabella watched Richard's face as he spoke, seeing vulnerability she hadn't witnessed before. "But more importantly," Richard continued, "I've realized that I've spent 40 years building the wrong kind of legacy. I created a business empire, but I lost my family in the process. I lost you and your brother, and I lost precious time with your mother." Amanda was crying now. Richard could hear it in her voice. "Dad, I've been so angry with you for so long." "You had every right to be angry, sweetheart. I put work before everything that mattered. I missed your college graduation for a board meeting. I missed Michael's wedding for a construction deadline. I even took business calls during your mother's memorial service." "I remember," Amanda whispered. "I'm calling because I want to change. That if it's not too late. I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the father I should have been years ago." The conversation lasted 2 hours. Amanda shared her hurt, her anger, her confusion about why her father's approval had always seemed tied to business success. Richard listened, really listened, for perhaps the first time in their relationship. When they finally hung up, Richard was emotionally drained, but hopeful. Amanda had agreed to fly to Chicago to be with him during the surgery. "That was beautiful," Isabella said softly. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Richard admitted, "but also free somehow. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there." The call to his son Michael was more difficult. Michael was angrier, more guarded, still resentful about years of feeling like he was competing with Wellington Industries for his father's attention. "Dad, I've heard these apologies before," Michael said flatly, "usually right before you disappear into another deal." "I know." and I understand why you don't trust me. But Michael, I'm dying. This isn't about making myself feel better. It's about trying to repair the damage I've done. You think dying gives you the right to forgiveness? Richard was quiet for a moment. No, son. I think dying gives me the courage to finally tell the truth. I failed you as a father. I failed your mother as a husband. I chose profit over people for 40 years, and I can't change that, but I can try to do better with whatever time I have left. The conversation was shorter, more painful, but it ended with Michael agreeing to think about visiting Chicago. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. After the calls, Richard and Isabella walked through Chapultepec Park, the massive green space in the heart of Mexico City. The morning was crisp and clear, families were picnicking, children were playing, and Richard found himself noticing details he would have missed just days earlier. "You know what strikes me?" he said, as they sat on a bench watching a father teach his young daughter to ride a bicycle. "I've spent 40 years accumulating wealth, but I never learned how to accumulate memories. That little girl will remember this day for the rest of her life, and it didn't cost her father anything but attention." Isabella smiled. "My mother used to take me to parks like this when I was young. We couldn't afford fancy vacations or expensive toys, but she made every Sunday feel like an adventure." "Tell me about her," Richard said. "I mean, really tell me. What was she like when she worked for my company?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "She was proud of that job. She used to come home and tell me about the projects Wellington Industries was building, about the buildings that would house families and businesses. She believed she was part of something important. And then I destroyed that. No, Mr. Wellington, you made a difficult business decision during an economic crisis. What happened after, the lack of severance, the difficulty finding new work, the financial hardship, that wasn't personal cruelty, it was systematic indifference, which might be worse, maybe. But it's also easier to forgive. Cruelty is a choice. Indifference is often just blindness, and blindness can be cured." As they walked back toward the hotel, Richard felt the weight of everything that had changed in the past 3 days. He had come to Mexico City as a desperate businessman trying to save his empire. He was leaving as a man trying to save his soul. "Isabella, I have one more favor to ask." "Of course. I'd like to meet your mother properly. I'd like to apologize in person for what my decisions cost your family, and I'd like to ask her something important." Maria Garcia finished her evening shift at 11 p.m., just as she had for 15 years. She was collecting her cleaning supplies from the 5th floor when she saw Isabella waiting by the elevator with a distinguished older man she recognized but had never spoken to directly. "Mami," Isabella said softly in Spanish, "this is Mr. Wellington. He'd like to speak with you." Maria studied the man's face, seeing something she hadn't expected: nervousness. In her years of invisible service, she had observed that wealthy guests were rarely nervous around hotel staff. "Señora Garcia," Richard began carefully, using the formal Spanish Isabella had taught him, "I understand you once worked for my company in Chicago." Maria nodded slowly. "Sí, señor. Many years ago, I wanted to apologize for what happened during the layoffs, for how difficult things became for your family afterward." Maria was quiet for a long time, studying this man who had unknowingly shaped the course of her life. "Señor Wellington, in 15 years of working in this hotel, you are the first guest who has ever asked my name, let alone apologized for something that happened long ago." Isabella translated the rapid Spanish for Richard, who visibly relaxed at his mother's gentle tone. "Your daughter," Richard continued, "saved me this week, not just my business deal, but something much more important. She helped me remember what it means to be human." Maria smiled, pride evident in her eyes as She looked at Isabella. She has always been special. Even as a little girl, she saw the best in people. Senora Garcia, I have a question for you. It may sound strange, but I'm having heart surgery next week. The recovery will be long, and I don't know how much time I have left. I was wondering if you might consider coming to Chicago to help and care for me during my recovery. Isabella's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this. I know it sounds odd, Richard continued quickly, but I've learned that healing requires more than medical care. It requires kindness, patience, and the presence of good people. Your daughter has shown me what grace looks like, and I suspect she learned it from you. Maria was quiet for several minutes, processing this unexpected offer. Finally, she spoke in careful English. Mr. Wellington, why would you want someone like me to care for you? Because, Senora Garcia, someone like you, someone who has faced hardship with dignity, who raised an extraordinary daughter while working jobs that others don't notice, who chose to build rather than destroy when life knocked you down. Someone like you understands what it means to live with purpose. Maria looked at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. Mammy, it's your choice, but I think this might be good for both of you. I would be honored, Senor, Maria said finally. But I have one condition. Anything. Isabella comes too. If you're serious about healing, you'll need people around you who understand both where you've been and where you're trying to go. 2 days later, the three of them were on a plane to Chicago. Richard had cancelled his remaining meetings in Mexico City, but the Mendoza family had understood completely. Don Carlos had even called personally to wish Richard well with his surgery. Business will wait, Elena had told Isabella before they left. Family and health come first, but when you're ready, our offer stands. During the flight, Richard found himself studying Maria and Isabella Garcia, a mother and daughter who had lost everything because of his business decisions, yet who were now choosing to help him through the most vulnerable period of his life. I don't understand it, he said to Isabella as they flew over the Gulf of Mexico. After what I did to your family, why are you both being so kind to me? Isabella was quiet for a moment, then answered in a way that reminded Richard why. He had trusted her with his most important business deal. Mr. Wellington, my mother and I learned something during those difficult years after Chicago. We learned that carrying anger is like carrying heavy stones. It doesn't hurt the person who wronged you, but it will definitely hurt your back. She looked out the airplane window at the lights below. Besides, I think there's something beautiful about the circle we're completing. 15 years ago, your business decision changed our lives dramatically. Now our personal choice is changing yours. Richard felt tears in his eyes as he realized the profound truth of what she was saying. Life had brought them full circle, but instead of revenge or resentment, they had chosen something much more powerful: redemption. As the plane descended toward Chicago, Richard thought about his upcoming surgery with less fear than he had felt in months. Whatever happened in the operating room, he was no longer facing it alone. He was facing it with two remarkable women who had taught him that the most important business in life was the business of being human. The lights of Chicago spread out below them like a constellation, and Richard allowed himself to hope that perhaps his story wasn't ending after all. Perhaps it was just beginning. The morning of Richard's surgery arrived grey and cold, typical for October in Chicago. Amanda arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital at 6 a.m., her hands shaking as she signed the visitor forms. She hadn't seen her father in 8 months, and their last meeting had ended in bitter words about his priorities. But the man she found in the pre-surgery room wasn't the Richard Wellington she remembered. He was smaller somehow, more vulnerable, surrounded by people she didn't recognize, but who clearly cared about him. "Amanda, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so glad you came. Dad, Amanda stopped mid-sentence. noticing the two women sitting quietly in the corner. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had visitors. Amanda, I'd like you to meet some very special people. This is Maria Garcia and her daughter Isabella. They've been taking care of me." Amanda's confusion was evident. These women didn't look like the type of healthcare providers her father usually employed. No medical uniforms, no clinical demeanor. They looked like family. Isabella stood and extended her hand warmly. "You must be Amanda. Your father has told us so much about you. He's very proud of your work with the children's literacy program." Amanda was stunned. Her father had never mentioned her volunteer work to anyone, as far as she knew. She had always assumed he considered it unimportant compared to real business. Yes, thank you, I'm sorry, but how do you know my father?" Richard took a deep breath. "It's a long story, sweetheart, but the short version is that Isabella saved my life in Mexico City, and now she and her mother are helping me remember how to live." Over the next hour, as they waited for the surgical team, Richard told Amanda the entire story. The panic in Mexico City, Isabella's unexpected help, the Mendoza deal, and the revelation about Maria's connection to Wellington Industries. "You mean you fired her mother 15 years ago?" Amanda asked, incredulous. "Yes, and now she's here, helping me through the scariest time of my life." Amanda looked at Maria with new eyes. "I don't understand. Why would you help him after what he did to your family?" Maria spoke in careful English, her voice gentle but firm. "Because, mija, anger is a poison we drink, hoping others will suffer. Your father made a business decision that hurt my family very much. But he's not a bad man, just a man who forgot how to see people as more than numbers. Besides," Isabella added with a slight smile, "we've learned that forgiveness isn't really for the person who wronged you, it's for yourself. Carrying hatred is exhausting." Dr. Chen arrived to walk Richard through the final pre-surgery procedures. The operation would take 4 to 6 hours, with significant risks given Richard's age and the severity of his condition. "Dad," Amanda said as they prepared to take him into surgery, "I need to tell you something. I've been angry with you for so long. I forgot that I also love you." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than any business deal, more than any amount of money. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." As they wheeled Richard toward the operating room, he called out, "Isabella, take care of my daughter while I'm gone, and Maria, pray for me if you would." The next 6 hours passed slowly in the surgical waiting room. Amanda found herself drawn into conversation with Isabella and Maria, learning about their lives, their struggles, and their remarkable capacity for grace in the face of hardship. "Your father is trying very hard to change," Isabella told Amanda as they sat in the hospital cafeteria. "Change is difficult at any age, but especially when you're facing mortality." "I know he's trying," Amanda said. "I can see it, but part of me is afraid to trust it. What if he recovers and goes right back to the way he was?" Maria reached across the table and took Amanda's hand. "Mija, people don't usually change because they want to. They change because they have to. Your father is facing the end of his life. That kind of fear either makes people bitter or it makes them wise. Your father has chosen wisdom." At 4 p.m., Dr. Chen emerged from surgery looking exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "The operation went well," she told the waiting group. "We were able to repair the damaged vessels and implant a device to regulate his heart rhythm. But the recovery will be long and difficult." "Can we see him?" Amanda asked. "He's in intensive care now, still sedated. You can see him briefly, but he probably won't be fully conscious until tomorrow." They found Richard connected to numerous machines, his face pale but peaceful. Amanda held his hand while Maria and Isabella stood quietly in the background. "He looks so small," Amanda whispered. "Sometimes," Isabella said gently, "we have to become small before we can become wise." That evening, as they sat in Richard's Chicago apartment, a sterile, impersonal space that reflected his old priorities, Amanda made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm taking leave from my job," she announced. "I want to be here during his recovery." "Amanda," Isabella said carefully, "that's a big decision. You sure? I've missed 40 years of really knowing my father. I don't want to miss whatever time we have left." As they prepared for what would be a long night, none of them knew that Richard's recovery would bring challenges none of them had anticipated, and that the real test of their newfound family bonds was still ahead. 3 weeks after surgery, Richard was home but struggling. The physical recovery was progressing well, but the emotional adjustment was proving more difficult than anyone had anticipated. For a man who had controlled every aspect of his life for 4 decades, being dependent on others for basic needs was devastating. "I can't even shower by myself," Richard said bitterly one morning as Maria helped him to the kitchen table. "What kind of life is this?" Amanda watched her father's frustration with growing concern. The man who had emerged from surgery with such clarity about his priorities was being consumed by depression and self-pity. "Dad," Dr. Chen said, "this phase is normal." Amanda tried to reassure him. "Your body is healing. You need to be patient." "Patient?" Richard's voice was sharp with anger. "I'm dying, Amanda. Whatever time I have left is being wasted sitting in this chair, unable to function like a human being." Isabella, who had been splitting her time between Chicago and Mexico City to manage the Mendoza partnership negotiations, could see that Richard was losing the perspective he had gained in Mexico. "Mr. Wellington," she said firmly, "you're feeling sorry for yourself," Amanda gasped. No one spoke to her father that directly, but Richard looked up, something shifting in his expression. "What? 3 weeks ago, you were grateful to be alive. You were excited about rebuilding relationships with your children. You were committed to creating a business partnership based on human values rather than just profit. Now you're angry because recovery is inconvenient." "Isabella," Amanda started, but her father held up his hand. "No, she's right," Richard said quietly. "I'm acting like a spoiled child." Maria, who had been quietly preparing Richard's medication, spoke up in her careful English. "Senor Wellington, may I tell you something?" Richard nodded. "When I lost my job 15 years ago, I was very angry. Not just at you, but at God, at life, at everything. I had worked so hard, been so responsible, and still I lost everything." She sat down across from him, her voice gentle but firm. "But then I realized something important. Being angry at my circumstances was only making my circumstances worse. I could not control what happened to me, but I could control how I responded to what happened to me." "It's different," Richard protested. "You were young, you had your whole life ahead of you. I'm 65 with a failing heart. See, it is different," Maria agreed. "You have something I didn't have then. You have people who love you and want to help you. You have a daughter who took leave from her job to care for you. You have a business partnership that people are maintaining while you recover. You have time to repair relationships that matter." Isabella pulled out her phone and showed Richard a series of emails. "The Mendoza family has been asking about you constantly. Elena has postponed 3 other potential partnerships because she believes in the vision you shared with them. Miguel has started developing sustainable tourism protocols based on your conversations. They're waiting for you, Dad," Amanda added. "Not for your money or your business expertise, but for you, the person you were becoming in Mexico City." Richard was quiet for a long time, absorbing what they were telling him. Finally, he looked up with something approaching his old determination. "You're right, all of you. I've been wallowing instead of healing." He turned to Maria. "Senora Garcia, I owe you another apology. You came here to help me recover, and I've been ungrateful and self-centered." "No apology needed, senor. But perhaps it is time to start living again." even if you must live differently than before. That afternoon, Richard asked Isabella to set up a video call with the Mendoza family. He wanted to see how the partnership was progressing and to assure them of his commitment despite his health challenges. The call was a revelation. Elena had been working with Isabella to develop a framework for the resort partnership that incorporated worker ownership models and community development programs. Miguel had created environmental impact studies that went far beyond anything Richard had originally envisioned. "Senor Wellington," Don Carlos said from his office in Mexico City, "your ideas have inspired my children to think bigger than our family ever has before. This partnership has become about more than building hotels. It has become about building communities." For the first time since his surgery, Richard felt the excitement he had experienced in Mexico City returning. "Don Carlos, I have a proposal. Once my doctors clear me for travel, I'd like to come back to Mexico City. I want to see what you've all been working on, and I want to contribute whatever I can to making this vision real. We would be honored to welcome you back, my friend." After the call ended, Amanda looked at her father with new respect. "Dad, you look like yourself again." "I feel like myself. Or rather, I feel like the person I'm trying to become." Richard turned to Isabella and Maria. "I owe you both an enormous debt. You've saved my life twice now, once from despair in Mexico City and once from bitterness here in Chicago." "No debt, senor," Maria replied. "We are family now. Family helps family." That evening, as they sat together in Richard's living room, which Amanda had been gradually making more warm and personal, Richard made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. "When I'm strong enough to travel, I want to go back to Mexico, but not just for a visit. I want to relocate there permanently." "Dad, are you sure?" Amanda asked. "Your doctors are here, your support system." "My support system is right here in this room," Richard replied, looking at the three women who had become his family. "And as for doctors, I suspect that what I need most now isn't medical care, it's purpose. I want to spend whatever time I have left building something meaningful with people I care about." Isabella smiled. "The Mendoza family would be thrilled, and I think Mexico City would be good for your recovery. But are you sure you're ready to leave Chicago permanently?" Richard looked around the apartment that had been his home for 20 years, but had never felt like a home. "Isabella, the only thing keeping me in Chicago is fear. Fear of change, fear of depending on others, fear of admitting that the life I built here was impressive, but not particularly meaningful." He stood up slowly, still weak but determined. "I'm tired of being afraid. I want to spend the rest of my life being brave." As they talked late into the evening about the practical aspects of such a major life change, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about the future, not anxiety about business deals or worry about legacy, but genuine enthusiasm for the adventures that lay ahead. The man who had come so close to dying alone and bitter was learning to live again, surrounded by love he had never expected to find. 6 months later, Richard stood on the terrace of his new apartment in Polanco, Mexico City, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. His recovery had been remarkable, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. The man who had once measured his worth in quarterly profits now measured his days in meaningful conversations and small acts of kindness. The doorbell rang, and he smiled as he heard familiar voices in the entryway. Amanda had arrived for her monthly visit, bringing with her a surprise that would make this day particularly special. "Dad!" Amanda called out as she entered with her luggage and a tall, hesitant-looking man in his 30s. "Michael?" Richard said softly, seeing his son for the first time in over a year. "You came." Amanda convinced me to give you one more chance, Michael said carefully, but there was warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there during their difficult phone call months earlier. Maria appeared from the kitchen, where she had been preparing a special breakfast for the occasion. She had become far more than Richard's caregiver. She was the heart of their unconventional household, the one who made sure everyone felt loved and fed and heard. "Mikos," she said warmly, embracing both of Richard's children. "Your father has been so excited about this visit." Isabella emerged from her home office, where she had been working on the latest developments with the Mendoza partnership. She was now officially the Director of Cultural Relations for the joint venture, a role that perfectly suited her skills in bridging different worlds. "Amanda, Michael, welcome," Isabella said. "Your father has been planning this day for weeks." "Planning? What?" Michael asked, still slightly suspicious of his father's motives. Richard smiled, feeling more nervous than he had for any business presentation. "I wanted to show you what I've been working on. The project that's become my real legacy." They drove through Mexico City to a construction site in the south of the city, where the framework of a beautiful resort was taking shape. But this wasn't the type of luxury development Richard had built for 40 years. "This is the first Mendoza Wellington Community Resort," Richard explained as they walked through the construction site. 60% of the profits go back to the local community. All workers receive ownership stakes. The environmental impact is net positive. Elena Mendoza joined them at the site, embracing Richard warmly. Over the months, she had become not just a business partner, but a dear friend. "Your father has revolutionized how we think about development," Elena told Amanda and Michael. "This project will employ over 300 local residents permanently, provide education scholarships for their children, and preserve the natural environment rather than exploiting it." Miguel appeared from one of the buildings under construction, covered in concrete dust but grinning broadly. "Richard, come see the childcare center. It's even better than we planned." As they toured the development, Amanda and Michael began to understand what their father had been building during his recovery. This wasn't just a business venture, it was a new model for how development could serve communities rather than just extracting profit from them. "Dad," Amanda said as they stood overlooking the resort taking shape below them, "this is incredible. But why didn't you build projects like this years ago?" Richard was quiet for a moment, watching workers carefully. "Installing solar panels on one of the buildings. Because I was building from fear instead of love. I was so afraid of not having enough, of not being successful enough, of not leaving a big enough mark on the world, that I forgot the point was to leave a good mark, not just a big one." Michael, who had been quietly observing throughout the tour, finally spoke up. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you won't go back to the old way of doing business when it gets difficult?" It was a fair question, and Richard didn't dismiss it. "You don't know, son. I can't prove my intentions to you with words, but I can show you with actions day by day, choice by choice. I can't change the past, but I can create a different future." That evening, they gathered for dinner at the Mendoza family home, where Don Carlos had prepared a special meal to welcome Richard's children. The conversation flowed between English and Spanish, with Isabella and Maria serving as bridges not just between languages, but between generations and cultures. "Your father saved our family business," Don Carlos told Amanda and Michael as dessert was served. "Not with money, but with vision. He helped us remember that success without purpose is just expensive emptiness." "And your family saved me," Richard replied. "All of you. You taught me that the most important business in life is the business of loving each other well." As the evening wound down, Amanda pulled her father aside for a private conversation. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Watching you today, seeing what you've built here, learning about the life you're creating, I'm proud of you. For the first time in my adult life, I'm genuinely proud to be your daughter." Richard felt tears in his eyes. Amanda, that means more to me than any business success I've ever had. I know it does, Dad. That's why it means so much. Michael's reconciliation was slower, more cautious, but by the end of the visit, he too was beginning to see the profound changes in his father. I'm still angry about the past, he told Richard honestly as they said goodbye at the airport. But I'm willing to get to know the person you're becoming. That's all I can ask for, son. That's all any of us can ask for, the chance to become better than we were. As Richard watched his children's plane disappear into the Mexico City sky, he felt a peace that had nothing to do with business success or financial security. He was surrounded by people who loved him, not for what he owned, but for who he was becoming. He was working on projects that would outlast him, not because they made money, but because they made life better for others. Maria joined him on the airport observation deck, watching the planes take off and land. "Any regrets, Senor?" she asked. Gently, Richard considered the question carefully. "I regret how long it took me to learn what really matters. I regret the relationships I damaged while I was learning, but regret the journey that brought me here? No. Every mistake, every failure, every moment of pain led me to this life, to this family, to this purpose." He turned to look at this remarkable woman who had chosen forgiveness over bitterness, who had taught him that true strength lay not in accumulating power but in sharing it. "Maria, do you ever regret helping me that night in the hotel? Your life would be much simpler if you had just ignored the struggling businessman in room 512. Maria smiled, the warm smile that had become the light of Richard's new life. "Senor Wellington, Richard, simple lives are not always meaningful lives. You have given my family a chance to be part of something beautiful that is worth any complication." As they drove back through the vibrant streets of Mexico City toward home, Richard reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been a dying millionaire desperate to preserve a business empire. Today, he was a recovering man, grateful to be part of a human family. The construction of the community resort would continue. The partnership with the Mendoza family would grow and expand to other projects. His relationship with his children would continue to heal and deepen. Isabella would complete her MBA and take on even greater responsibilities in their shared vision. Maria would continue to be the heart that held them all together. But more than any of that, Richard had learned the most important lesson of his life, that the language of the heart is universal, that love translates perfectly in any tongue, and that it's never too late to choose connection over isolation, forgiveness over resentment, purpose over profit. As they pulled into the driveway of the place he now called home, Richard Wellington smiled at the profound irony of it all. He had spent 40 years trying to build a legacy that would outlast him. Instead, he had discovered that the only legacy worth having was love. Love given freely, love received gratefully, and love shared abundantly with anyone brave enough to speak the language of the heart.